A retired sniper takes one last job to save her sister's life, only to discover mid-mission that her target is a pilot who is her own husband. They called him the Ghost Eye. In the places where people spoke of such things, it was a name wrapped in equal parts, respect and fear. The kind of name uttered quietly over dimly lit tables, or mumbled during after-action debriefs in rooms where the walls always seemed to listen. The Ghost Eye was the sniper you never saw coming, never heard, and never survived. But the secret hidden in all those rumors was that the Ghost Eye wasn't a man at all. She was Claire Lawson, and her identity had been protected so fiercely that even those who worked closest to her never knew who she truly was. She built a reputation on stillness, patience, and an almost supernatural instinct for timing. While others thought in minutes and seconds, she thought in breaths, in the slight shift of a shadow, in the slow arch of the sun. Her longest confirmed kill had been over 2.5 kilometers in the dry, shimmering air of an Afghan desert. The kind of shot that made even veteran marksmen shake their heads. But to Claire, it was just another day, another mission, another trigger press that would vanish into the folds of memory. Her legend was stitched together from stories that always sounded like they belonged to a ghost. The Caracas billboard job where she lay inside the hollow frame of a weather-beaten advertisement for 47 straight hours, rain seeping into her clothes, fingers slowly going numb, until a drug lord stepped into her line of fire at dawn. The Montenegro pier hit, where 3 men dropped in less than 5 seconds, their bodies hitting the deck of a yacht before the echo of the first shot had even faded over the water. Each mission was executed with the same unshakable rhythm, the same quiet inevitability. But then came Veracruz. The hotel room she'd been in that day had smelled faintly of bleach and damp curtains, the kind of place where every sound seemed too loud, too close. She lay prone, her barrette balanced on the windowsill, eyes fixed on the courtyard below. Her target was Raul Jimenez, a lieutenant in the Morales cartel, mid-30s, well-muscled, a gold chain glinting at his throat. At precisely 3:12 p.m., he was supposed to leave the house and walk to a waiting SUV. The shot would be clean, almost insultingly easy for someone like her. At 3:12, the gate opened. Raul stepped out exactly on time, his stride confident, the kind of confidence that came from believing you were untouchable. Claire inhaled, held, prepared to break the shot. But then a streak of movement entered her scope from the left. A little girl, no older than 8, chasing a paper airplane. She was laughing, running toward Raul, who bent to lift her into his arms with a smile so warm it didn't match the profile she'd been given. Claire's heartbeat slowed, not sped up. The shot was still there. Perfect! Her handler's voice hissed in her earpiece, telling her to take it. She didn't move. The voice grew sharper, demanding confirmation. Claire finally whispered, "Negative," and began dismantling the rifle. There was a curse on the line, a question, then silence. 2 days later, she wired the money back to the client and disappeared. No one in her world knew where she went. Some thought she'd been killed. Others believed she'd been absorbed into government protection. In reality, she'd chosen to disappear entirely. She built a quiet life in Oregon, working at a greenhouse that sold rare plants to clients who cared more about exotic leaves than the hands that tended them. It was there she met Evan Rourke on a rainy afternoon in 2019. He'd walked in looking for a palm for his apartment, wearing the uniform of a man at ease with himself, tall, broad-shouldered, the easy confidence of someone who'd spent years flying at 35,000 feet. He'd been an Air Force pilot once, with a scattering of commendations and a knack for telling stories that left you leaning in without realizing it. Now he captained long-haul flights for a major airline, his life a steady cycle of departures and arrivals. They talked longer than necessary about plants that day. 2 days later, they met for coffee. A week after that dinner, Claire told him she'd worked in logistics for an international security firm, before moving into horticulture. It was a partial truth, one that didn't invite questions. Evan didn't push. He liked her calmness, the way she seemed grounded in a world that moved too fast. Within a year, they were married in a small vineyard outside Portland. No grand spectacle, just a handful of friends and family under a sky that threatened rain but never followed through. Evan flew 4 or 5 days at a time. Claire stayed home, tending the greenhouse, raising their daughter Ella. Between his salary and the careful investments she'd made from her old life, they were more than comfortable. For years she never so much as touched a rifle, and the thought of going back to that world felt as distant as the horizon Evan so often chased. Then the call came. It was a gray October morning, and Evan was packing for a long route, Portland to Hong Kong, onward to Singapore, then back again. Claire was rinsing Ella's cereal bowl when the phone rang, a blocked number she almost ignored. The voice on the other end was male, smooth, and so familiar it made her fingers tighten around the porcelain. "Claire, or do you prefer Ghost Eye?" She said it was the wrong number, but he didn't miss a beat. "Don't waste my time. This is business. 1-day contract. 7 figures. She told him she was out. He said it wasn't for fun. "I know you need it," he added, and the way he said it made her stomach drop. 2 weeks earlier, her younger sister Melissa had been diagnosed with a rare autoimmune condition. The only specialist clinic able to treat it was in Switzerland, and the cost was staggering. Claire had quietly begun selling off investments, but she was still nearly $900,000 short. She hadn't told Evan. She didn't want to burden him or risk his career being pulled into something complicated and dangerous. And now this voice was offering more than she needed in a single day's work. The job was simple on paper. A rising pharmaceutical CEO was flying from Vancouver to San Francisco for an investor meeting aboard a Gulfstream G700. The client wanted the pilot dead. No reasons offered, none requested. The aircraft would descend over the Mendocino coastline, the approach vector low enough to give a window of less than 3 minutes. Payment was $1.2 million, half wired immediately, the rest on confirmation. Claire didn't check the pilot's name. She told herself she didn't care. The rifle was still where she'd left it, in a storage unit 2 towns over, locked inside a battered Pelican case. She cleaned it slowly, reacquainting herself with its weight and the way the oil darkened the steel. She could feel the muscle memory slotting back into place, as if the years had been days. She scouted the vantage point, an abandoned fire lookout tower north of Point Arena, high enough to see the ocean glittering and the airfield routes stretching in visible lines through the sky. She hiked the gear in under a weather tarp, every step purposeful, her mind quiet in the way it only ever was before a mission. On the morning of the flight, fog clung to the coastline like a restless tide. She lay prone, the rifle steady on its bipod, the crosshairs trained on the patch of sky where the Gulf Stream would break from the clouds. Her breathing matched the slow pulse of the sea far below. The hum of engines reached her first faint growing, and then the sleek white fuselage appeared, cutting clean through the fog. Her scope adjusted, pulling the cockpit into sharp relief. She saw the pilot's head in profile, headset, dark sunglasses, crisp uniform collar. Her finger brushed the trigger. The fog shifted in a breath of wind, sunlight catching the edge of his jaw. She froze, the shape of his hands on the controls, the familiar line of his cheek, the way his shoulders moved as he adjusted the trim. It was Evan. Her heartbeat slammed into her throat. Her heartbeat slammed into her throat, a heavy, pulsing thud she could feel in her fingertips where they rested on the trigger guard. For a moment she thought her eyes were lying, that maybe the fog and the distance had blurred reality into something familiar, something dangerous, but the longer she held him in the glass the less room there was for doubt. That was Evan. His hands, those same hands she'd watched cradle their newborn daughter. now wrapped in neat black gloves gripping the yoke of the Gulf Stream. The way his shoulders moved, the subtle tilt of his head as he listened to the radio chatter. She knew those rhythms like she knew her own. Her mouth went dry. She forced her breathing into slow, controlled draws. Not because of training now, but because she could feel her body trying to betray her. The rifle felt heavier than she remembered, as if the steel had absorbed the weight of the choice in front of her. The engine's low hum deepened, vibrating faintly through the wooden planks beneath her stomach. Evan was wearing the expression she'd seen so many times when he was at work. Focused calm, the hint of a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth, as if some small private satisfaction sat with him in the cockpit. She thought of how he looked when he was telling Ella bedtime stories over the phone from a hotel room halfway around the world. The soft warmth in his voice, the way he always ended with, "I'll be home soon, Peanut." That voice lived in her now, layered over the sound of the engines, competing with the part of her mind that was calculating wind, drift, airspeed, distance, all on autopilot. She told herself to move, to lift her head away from the scope, but her eyes stayed locked. Every part of her training said hesitation was death. Not just for her, but for the mission. And yet here she was, frozen in a moment she couldn't have planned for in 1,000 lifetimes. It was absurd how fast the mind could travel in seconds. A part of her wanted to rewind to 3 days ago, to the moment she'd said yes to the job, to the moment she didn't bother checking the pilot's name because the money was too good, because her sister's life was hanging on it. She'd been so sure she could keep it clean, detached, surgical. The pilot had been just a silhouette in her imagination. And now that silhouette had a face she'd kissed 1,000 times. Her finger hovered over the trigger in the precise space between decision and execution. The Gulf Stream was in her window now, descending smoothly through the last scraps of fog, the angle perfect, the sun breaking just enough to gleam off the curved glass of the cockpit. She could still hear her handler's voice from years ago, the one who'd brought her into the fold in the first place. "You don't get to flinch, Lawson. You don't get to make it personal." Back then she'd believed it. She'd lived by it. But somewhere between Veracruz and now, the lines had blurred. The little girl with the paper airplane had carved something into her that no amount of field discipline could erase. In her ear, the calm was silent. She hadn't worn one this time. This was her job, her shot, her burden. No one barking orders, no one reminding her of the clock. And yet she could feel the clock in her blood, in the narrowing of the kill window. Less than 90 seconds until the angle was gone, and the Gulf Stream would be out of reach. She adjusted the scope slightly, the fine-tuned motion automatic. The reticle settled perfectly over the pilot's temple. It was a clean shot. At this range, the .50 cal would punch through the glass, and the cabin would be chaos before anyone could even call for help. Her breathing slowed to a crawl. She remembered the first time she'd held this rifle, back when it wasn't hers. A dust-blown range somewhere outside Basra. The metal hot under her palms, the smell of spent powder hanging in the air. Her instructor, older, lined face, eyes like river stones, had told her, "This isn't a weapon, it's a promise. You pull that trigger, you promise someone's not going home." She'd carried that with her through every job. And now, here was Evan, strapped into the very seat she'd promised herself she would never aim at. The ocean stretched out behind him, a flat silver expanse broken by the occasional dark fin of a rock. Below her, the wind combed through the pines, bringing with it the briny tang of salt water and the faint metallic scent of the rifle itself. She closed her eyes for half a second, and in that darkness she saw Melissa, pale under hospital light, tubes snaking from her arms, her voice breaking when she told Claire she was scared. She saw Ella too, hair tangled from sleep, standing at the front window waiting for her dad to pull into the driveway. These were the poles of her world now. Both of them in danger in different ways, both needing her to choose. She opened her eyes. The Gulf Stream had inched closer, the curve of its nose now cutting into the edge of the scope's field. 60 seconds, maybe less. Her thumb slid off the safety with a soft, irreversible click. She steadied her breath. Somewhere deep inside, a voice, not her handler's, not a client's, asked the question she'd been avoiding. If she didn't take the shot, who would? And if someone else did, could she live with not knowing if Evan had seen it coming? But if she did take it? Her mind recoiled from the image, but it was there, sharp as the glass under her crosshairs. She had been taught that in the final moment before a kill, everything slowed, sharpened, came into perfect focus. Now, everything did the opposite. Memories bled into each other. The way Evan had looked at her during their vows, the heat of the Veracruz sun, the sound of rain on the Caracas billboard vinyl, the hospital monitor beeping beside her sister's bed. The weight of all of it pressed down until her arms felt like lead. 50 seconds. Her body knew what to do. Her body had always known. The decision wasn't in her hands anymore. It was in her heart, and her heart was screaming in two directions at once. The engines roared louder now, the nose angling slightly as the pilot, her husband, adjusted for the descent. In that shift, the light changed again, a blade of sun cutting across his cheek. It was too much. She blinked, and the rifle wavered. 40 seconds. Somewhere far below, a gull cried. It was the smallest sound in the world, and somehow it cracked the spell. She lifted her head from the scope. The Gulf Stream slid forward in the sky, the cockpit now just a bright bubble reflecting the endless Pacific. Her heart hammered in her ears. She had seconds left to change her mind, seconds to drop back to the scope, seconds to pull the trigger and change everything. She didn't move. The engines faded as the jet moved on, sliding out of her reach, disappearing toward the horizon and the safety of San Francisco airspace. Her hands were still on the rifle, but they were trembling now, a tremor she hadn't felt in over a decade. The job wasn't done. The money would vanish, and whoever had ordered this would know she'd failed. But Evan was alive. The silence in the tower pressed in the moment the Gulf Stream was gone. A sudden absence of noise that left her ears ringing. The wind moved differently now, restless, picking at the edges of the weather tarp she'd pulled over her gear. She lay there longer than she needed to, cheek pressed to the stock, staring into empty sky as if another jet might materialize and give her a second chance to choose. But nothing came. It was just her and the faint hiss of the ocean below, and the heavy truth of what she'd done, or hadn't done. She worked slowly, methodically, breaking the rifle down into its pieces, sliding each into the foam cutouts in the Pelican case. The motions were muscle memory, but they didn't steady her this time. The tremor in her fingers wouldn't quit. It wasn't fear. Not exactly. It was the aftershock of restraint, the ache of holding back an action her body had been primed to carry out. By the time she started the hike down from the tower, the fog had thickened again, swallowing the coastline. Each step felt louder than it should have. The crunch of pine needles under her boots, sounding like firecrackers in the damp air. The trail was empty. She moved like she used to after a hit, quiet, efficient, scanning for movement out of habit. But the rhythm was wrong. This was the walk of someone who hadn't done the job. Her phone buzzed in her pocket before she reached the base of the hill. No name on the screen, just the number she'd been called from 3 days ago. She let it ring once, twice, then answered. "You missed," the voice said flat, almost curious. She didn't say anything. "You don't miss, Ghost Eye. Not you. Which means you saw something." Still she stayed quiet. The gravel of the path crunched under her boots, steady as a metronome. "Doesn't matter," the voice went on. "There's always a contingency. You had the window. You didn't take it. We both know the deal's off." She stopped walking. "Who's the client?" A low chuckle, humorless. "You don't ask that. You've never asked that. I'm asking now." The pause that followed told her everything. This wasn't about protocol. It was about leverage. Let's just say the client has an interest in that CEO not making it to San Francisco with a certain pilot at the controls. Her stomach tightened. Why the pilot? You'd have to ask them, and you won't be talking to them. The line clicked dead. She stood there on the trail, fog curling around her ankles, the phone still in her hand. Whoever had ordered this hit wasn't finished. If they had a contingency, Evan was still a target, and she had no idea how close the next shooter was. By the time she reached her car, she'd already started calculating the flight time from Vancouver to San Francisco, the likelihood of the Gulf Stream already having landed, and whether there were safe ways to warn him without tipping her hand. But every option felt thin. Driving back, the coastal road twisted and dipped, the Pacific flashing silver through breaks in the trees. She gripped the wheel hard enough to make her knuckles ache. Evan would be home in 2 days, maybe 3. When he walked through the door, would she be able to look at him and say nothing? Would she be able to ask the right questions without betraying how she knew the answers? Her mind kept circling back to Melissa. The clinic bill, the treatments, the quiet fear in her sister's voice. The money was gone now. Gone because she hadn't taken the shot. Gone because she'd chosen one life over another. And yet the guilt for that choice was doubled. Melissa still needed saving, and Evan was walking into a threat he didn't even know existed. She replayed the moment in the scope, over and over, until the road blurred and she had to blink hard to keep the line straight. The way the light had hit his jaw, the way the fog had thinned just enough, the way her breath had caught. Every frame of it was burned into her. When she pulled into the driveway, the house looked exactly as it had that morning. The greenhouse in back glowed faintly through its glass panes. Inside, Ella's crayons were still scattered across the kitchen table, her half-finished drawing of what looked like a lopsided cat lying in the middle. Claire stood there longer than she meant to, hand resting on the back of a chair, listening to the tick of the clock over the stove. She wanted to call Evan. She wanted to hear his voice, to know he was fine. But she also knew that if she heard him, if she let him talk about his day, she might not be able to stop herself from saying something that would unravel everything. Instead, she went to the bedroom, set the rifle case on the bed, and stared at it. She'd never brought it into the house before. It didn't belong here, in the life she'd built. And yet here it was, the ghost of who she'd been sitting right in the middle of clean sheets and folded laundry. The phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from a different number. Last chance. Another op coming. Bigger payout. No name, no details. Just a dangling hook. She deleted it without replying. But that night, lying awake beside the empty space Evan would fill in a few days, she couldn't stop thinking about who else might be out there with a rifle and a sight line. She knew one thing for certain. If they sent someone else, she might be the only person who could stop them. The next morning came without rest. Claire moved through the kitchen on autopilot, brewing coffee she didn't drink, slicing fruit she didn't taste. Every motion calculated to look like the start of an ordinary day. But her mind was already tracking weather reports, flight schedules, the rhythm of Evan's routes. If the client had sent a new team, they wouldn't waste time. They'd hit on the next available opportunity, and she needed to know when that was. She couldn't ask him directly without drawing suspicion. So she waited until Ella was distracted with her cereal and quietly opened his tablet, the one synced to his company account. A calendar alert blinked at the top. Vancouver to San Francisco, 0800 Wednesday. She'd been right. Same route, same Gulf Stream, same CO. Her hands tightened around the edge of the counter until her knuckles whitened. That gave her 3 days. 3 days to find out who the second shooter was, where they'd set up, and how to stop them without ever letting Evan know why. She thought about calling someone from her old network, but she'd burned most of those bridges when she left. And the one she hadn't burned, well, They'd want to know why Ghost Eye was suddenly asking about an operation she'd already declined. That alone could make her a liability. She chose a different route. The small town where they lived had one advantage. Everything coming in or out passed through just a handful of choke points, roads, docks, airstrips. She spent the next 2 days driving them all, glassing rooftops with a pair of compact binoculars, noting any construction scaffolding, open windows, or abandoned buildings with a clean view of the airport's main runway. By the end of the second day, she had narrowed it to 3 possible locations, each high enough and close enough for a competent shooter to make the shot. The one she kept coming back to was an unfinished luxury condo project just outside the airport fence. The top floor was open to the air. No glass yet, just a skeleton of beams and concrete. The night before Evan's flight, she couldn't sleep. Melissa's voice kept looping in her head, soft but urgent. "You don't have to do this for me, Claire." But Melissa didn't know. She didn't know that it wasn't just her sister's life hanging in the balance anymore. It was Evan's. It was Ella's future. When dawn finally bled into the horizon, Claire was already in her car, the Pelican case in the trunk. She drove the long way, avoiding the main roads, parking 3 blocks from the condo site and hauling the case the rest of the way on foot. The air smelled like wet concrete and sea salt. Her boots were silent on the unfinished stairs as she climbed to the top floor, every sense sharpened by the knowledge that someone else might already be there. She found them on the east side. A man in a faded ball cap, crouched behind a sandbag rest with a Remington 700 laid out in front of him. The rifle scope was already trained on the airport tarmac, the action open, a single brass round gleaming in his fingers. "Morning," she said. He spun, startled, but not enough to lose his grip on the rifle. His eyes flicked over her, civilian clothes, no visible weapon, and then dismissed her as a threat. "You're trespassing," he said flatly. "Yeah," she said, stepping closer. "So are you." Something in her tone must have registered, because his posture changed. He slid the round into the chamber and leveled the barrel toward the opening in the wall. "You don't want to do that," she said. "Lady, you need to walk away." She let him see the way her gaze locked on his stance, his grip, the tension in his trigger finger. Let him realize she was reading him like an open book. His brow furrowed. "Who the hell are you?" "Someone who used to be better at this than you are," she said, and then she moved. It wasn't elegant. She'd never been a martial artist, never needed to be. Snipers rarely worked at arm's length. But the distance between them was short, and the element of surprise was hers. She slammed her shoulder into his chest, knocking him off balance just enough to wrench the rifle sideways. The shot went off anyway, the sound deafening in the open space, the round punching harmlessly into the concrete wall. They grappled, his hands clawing at the rifle, hers finding the bolt and yanking it back to eject the next round. The brass clinked against the floor and rolled away. He swore, driving a knee toward her ribs, but she twisted clear, letting the momentum carry him into the sandbags. By the time he'd recovered, she had the rifle in her hands. She could have used it, could have ended the threat right there. But there was no time. The sound of the shot would already have drawn attention, and Evan's plane was probably on final approach. She ran to the opening, raising the rifle, heart hammering. The Gulfstream appeared out of the morning haze, landing gear down, flaps extended. Through the scope, she saw the cockpit, saw Evan's profile, calm and focused, oblivious to how close death had been again. She didn't fire. Instead, she scanned the tarmac, the perimeter, every angle the other shooter might have had a partner covering. Nothing, just ground crew, and the CEO's waiting motorcade. The plane touched down, rolling past the spot where she stood hidden in the skeletal building. The other man was gone when she turned back, vanished down the stairwell, leaving only the smell of gunpowder and the echo of that single misfired shot. She disassembled the rifle with practice speed, scattering the pieces into separate bags she'd planted earlier. No one would find them all in one place. Then she was gone, melting into the city's early traffic before the authorities swarmed the site. That night, Evan called from San Francisco. His voice was light, almost giddy, as he told her about the flight, the weather, the CEO's handshake. She listened, smiling where she was supposed to, her heart still pounding from the close call. "I'll be home Friday," he said. "I can't wait to see you." She swallowed hard. Me too. Melissa's condition didn't improve. The money was still a problem. The client never called again, and Claire didn't go looking for them. But sometimes, in the quiet hours after Ella was asleep, she'd take the rifle case out from the back of the closet and run her fingers over the worn grips, remembering the feel of the trigger, the clean snap of a shot taken without hesitation. She'd saved Evan. She'd protected the life she'd built. But in doing so, she'd reminded herself of something she'd tried to bury. The part of her that could never really walk away from the scope. And she knew, though she would never say it out loud, that if the call came again, and it was him on the line, she'd answer. Not for the money, not even for the thrill, but because she'd learned the hard way that sometimes the only one who can stop a sniper is another sniper.